Hello, welcome to this recap of our earlier panel on leadership and research and the power of radical candor. I'm Christina Quinn. I am an assistant dean in the graduate school at Colorado State University and also with CSU Rates. Um, and earlier we had a panel with Dr. Josie Broussard from the Sleep Lab team. We did not record that session so that people could be candid and talk openly and know that it wasn't going to be recorded. But the information itself is still really helpful and useful. So I'm here to give you a quick recap of what it is that we talked about. What is radical candor and what does it matter? Why would it be important to you in your leadership? That's what we're going to talk about. All right, so radical candor comes out of the term, and the model comes from Kim Scott's book on radical candor. And Kim Scott was at Google and at Apple as a team lead. So she had to learn to give feedback to lots of different teams in a fast-moving industry. And what she found out was that it's not always as easy as you might think, and that she needed some better guidance. So she developed her own kind of grids and guides for being able to give formative feedback to her team members so that they could grow and become the best at their jobs that they could and be satisfied in their work. So it was this kind of mutually beneficial relationship developing through the being able to, show that you care about other people and that you also can give and receive feedback within those spaces. So her model is what we're going to talk about today mostly, but radical respect. This was her adaptation and recognition of radical candor in spaces where systemic racism or sexism or other kind of power dynamics make it difficult for radical candor to be practiced easily. And so radical respect is the companion to radical candor. We're mostly going to be talking about radical candor because there's a kind of key kind of baseline for what it is that we're talking about with conversations. And you can kind of think about what plays out and what's going to be most helpful for you. Radical candor, you just look it up and you can find blogs and podcasts and trainings and all kinds of information. Kim Scott's Radical Candor website is fabulous. It's a great resource. So go and check it out and see what might be of interest and explore more, and reach out if you have questions or conversations or ideas for us to continue with in our training programs here at CSU. So I'm going to play a video by Kim Scott where she just details out pretty quickly, within 6 minutes, what it is that radical candor is.
Hi, I'm Kim Scott, and I'm the author of Radical Candor. It's a very simple idea, and if you can put it into practice, it will help you do the very best work of your life and build the best relationships of your career. All I mean by radical candor is care personally and challenge directly at the same time. Why is that so complicated? To explain why, I'm going to offer you a radical candor framework, a 2x2 framework. All of life's hardest problems really can be boiled down to a good 2x2 framework. Care personally, challenge directly. Let's take each dimension in turn. First of all, care personally. This is what I think of as the give a damn dimension of radical candor. And what happens here begins when we're about 18, 19, 20 years old. The problem begins then. We're right at that moment in our lives. We get our first job, but our egos are maximally fragile and our personas are beginning to solidify. And right at that moment, someone comes along and says, be professional. And for an awful lot of us, we sort of translate that to mean to leave your emotions, leave your true identity, leave your humanity, leave everything that's best about you at home and show up at work like some kind of robot. And you can't possibly care personally if you're showing up at work like some kind of robot. So what I encourage folks to do is to really be more than just professional, not be unprofessional, but really create the kind of environments in your workplaces where you can bring real human relationships. You can develop real human relationships at work. However, love is not all you need. You also need the other dimension of radical candor. This is what I think of as the challenge directly dimension, or the willingness to piss people off. And this is hard because from the moment we learn how to speak, starting when we're 18 months old, not 18 years old, our parents come along and they say to us some version of, if you don't have anything nice to say, don't say anything at all. And I would argue that now that you are working, it's your job to say it. So this is hard. Radical candor is hard. It's hard because of this be professional training since we got our first job, since we were 18 years old. And it's hard because of this if you don't have anything nice to say, don't say anything at all training that's been pounded into our head since we learned to speak at 18 months old or however old we were. One of the things that I've done to try to make it a little bit easier is to give a name to what happens when we fail on one dimension or another, which we all do multiple times a day. So sometimes we remember to challenge directly, but we forget to show that we care personally. And this I call obnoxious aggression. In an early draft of Radical Candor, I called this the asshole quadrant because it seemed, I don't know, more radically candid. But I stopped doing that for a very important reason. As soon as I did that, people would use this framework to start writing names in boxes. And I beg of you, don't use this framework that way. Think about radical candor like a compass that is going to help guide specific conversations that you're having with specific people to a better place. Now, very often when we realize we've acted like a jerk and we've landed in the obnoxious aggression quadrant, rather than moving up on the care personally dimension, it is our instinct to go the wrong way on challenge directly. And the problem there is that then you wind up in the very worst place of all, manipulative insincerity. And this is where passive aggressive behavior, political behavior, backstabbing behavior creeps in. The kind of stuff that makes work intolerable. And it's kind of fun to tell stories about obnoxious aggression and manipulative insincerity. But the fact of the matter is, because that's where the drama is, but the fact of the matter is the vast majority of us make the vast majority of our mistakes in this last quadrant, where we do remember to show that we care personally. It turns out most people are actually pretty nice, but we're so concerned about not hurting someone's feelings that we fail to tell them something they'd be better off knowing. And this is what I call ruinous empathy. So one of the things that I want to do in the next couple of seconds is just offer you an order of operations. How can you begin to put these ideas into practice? Start by soliciting radical candor, especially soliciting criticism. Don't dish it out until you prove that you can take it. So you want to solicit first. Now you're in a better place to start giving radical candor. And remember, radical candor is just as much about praise, even more about praise, than it is about criticism. You want to focus on the good stuff, but you don't want to ignore problems either. So that's giving radical candor. Now, in order to make sure that these conversations are good, the next thing you need to do is to gauge it. If there were an objective measure of radical candor, I could just post on a blog post somewhere what the right words are, but there aren't necessarily right words. What you need to do is understand how what you are saying lands for the other person. So radical candor gets measured not at the speaker's mouth, but at the listener's ear. So if the person is upset, if they're angry, if they're sad, that's your cue to attend to the care personally dimension of radical candor, to understand the human need behind the upset. But if the person just isn't hearing you, which actually, even though you fear the strong emotions, what usually happens is you work up your courage to say something and then the person doesn't even hear you. When they don't hear you, that's your cue to move out on the challenge directly dimension of radical candor. And last but not least, encourage it. All too often, one person who we know comes and starts talking to us badly about another person who's not in the room. And it's tempting to listen. It's tempting to think that you're being an empathetic colleague, an empathetic friend to listen. This is the one time when listening is not your friend. All you're doing is stirring the political pot. When that happens, the thing to do is to encourage that person to go talk to the person with whom they're having the problem, the conflict. So encourage radical candor. Thank you so much for your time. Go forth and be radically candid.
So ultimately, you can think about this framework as a compass. I really like that framing of it, right? The compass is a guide for your individual conversations so that you can take them to a better place. That better place, of course, is caring and direct. Clear is kind, right? It's a tool for orienting your feedback, your commentary, your critique, and your advice. You can think about this as you engage with peers within your field. When you're asked to give feedback on a project, you always, start off with, that's why we start off with the kind, right? But people have to believe it. It can't just be false. It has to be genuine, right? On what it is that you're saying. And then you go for, the harsher critique. It's also a tool that helps you acknowledge the asymmetry and the dynamism of relationships, right? The power or positions and the kind of power differentials that happen, regardless of what you're talking about, whether they're institutionally structured, right? People are given titles and places and job roles, or it could be just something the dynamics of a team, right? And personality shifts and the kind of those daily contexts and changes. The That grid gives you kind of a way to navigate conversations that are always in flux and changing. And so we went through and we had deeper conversations about each one of these categories in the framework. And just a reminder that these are not personality types. You don't put people into these categories, but that it's a way for you to see how it is that you're practicing your conversational and kind of directional skills. And also, can you get feedback, right? Are you able to receive it? Again, we did go through this grid a couple different times and talk about it. And the reminder is, radical candor. There are a couple things here on that kind of being able to practice sincere and kind criticism. Obnoxious aggression, that's that kind of front stabbing, right? Those attacks or when things can't be delivered kindly. Ruinous empathy. One of the things, and we did talk about this earlier, was that Kim Scott, in writing the book, talked about how she had started off in this category, and she said that many people do. So if you have, you're continually receiving positive feedback. Dr. Broussard shared that she had been in a lab where she got continual positive feedback about a proposal that she was writing. She submitted it to NIH and got feedback at a very low score and was devastated, and the project didn't go forward. And what she needed was to have clear direction and feedback. These are people who are, professional setting, but they were so nice and so kind that they didn't want to say anything to hurt her feelings. And so that you can see the consequences of that. Kim Scott shares in her own work, and you'll find her talking about this elsewhere, where she talks about her first time supervising a team and not wanting to give negative or critical feedback to one of the team members, who then had to be let go at the end of the year due to poor performance. And as he was leaving, he's like, "Why didn't you give me this feedback before? Why didn't you tell me before?" And so that place of ruinous empathy can have, it seems nice, can have dire consequences for people professionally, maybe even personally, right? So just think about that when people need to really hear from you, but in a kind, clear way. And manipulative insincerity. This is the one where, it's the place she says that if you start off in ruinous empathy where people aren't saying critical things, that once it does turn critical, oftentimes, and when people are no longer nice, then all you're left with is this kind of manipulative insincerity. I think of this as like the pit of despair. It's where praise is insincere, that flattery happens, but that your people have to become self-protective, and it's the worst kind of feedback at all. And again, we did talk about this multiple times. And the last thing that we did address, and this is the grid from radical respect. The reason it's not the same 2x2, so please note that. The 2x2 here is on collaboration and honoring individuality. We brought this up for a couple reasons. One is if you are on a team and you're looking at ways not just to build in radical candor, but then how can you also build in and build off of that for radical respect? This is a great also grid and kind of model for you to follow. We didn't go through it in greater depth, but notice that if you are not in the mode of collaboration, you might be slipping into a mode of coercion and trying to force, right, your own processes and ways of doing things or what it is that you want onto others. If you're not honoring individuality of everyone who's on the team, you might kind of be slipping into demanding conformity of that team, that individuals don't have something to offer, right? Based on their own accord, you're just going to demand that everybody kind of adhere and kind of conform to what it is that you expect of them. And this bar, that kind of lower quadrant there, kind of like the manipulative insincerity quadrant for radical candor, winds up being the worst quadrant of all. It winds up being the place of prejudice. It means the place of bias and the place perhaps of being of bullying. And so if you have those kinds of experiences in your workforce or workplace, it might be good to check out Radical Respect as well and just kind of see maybe there's something in addition that you would like to build off of and build some awareness and maybe build some skills with. If you're going into a leadership position and you know that you're going to be working and guiding teams in a kind of managerial capacity, definitely pay attention to Radical Respect and thinking about how it is that your systems are operating, policies are operating, and how it is that you're creating some sort of broader culture within the organization, within your team, right? And thinking about how it is that you could bring in notions of radical respect then, as well as building off of radical candor. So that was our discussion for the day. So I appreciate you being here and being interested in radical candor. I wish you all the best in your future conversations.